Hello, everyone. Welcome to Visionary Futures, Science Fiction Theater for Social Justice Movements. My name is Josh Glenn-Kayden. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am the creator and director of this project. Before we get started, we would like to acknowledge that UMass Amherst exists on the ancestral and unceded territory of the Abenaki, the Wabanaki Confederacy, Pawtucket, Nipmuc, Pecumtuck, and Nonotuck nations. We affirm that it is important to understand and honor the history of the indigenous land that we occupy, while recognizing this acknowledgement is insufficient and does not undo the legacies of violence and displacement of indigenous people. We aim to take small steps towards a future of decolonization and reconciliation. Thank you. So, Visionary Futures as a project explores the intersections of science fiction theater and social justice movements. We've commissioned 3 great playwrights to each write a short play that engages with visionary fiction, which really means science fiction that is engaging with systems of oppression and imagines more just futures. And then a crucial part of this process was pairing each writer with an activist or scholar whose work intersects with the play's content. These teams have had conversations at different points within each play's life to create work that is both visionary in approach while still being grounded in and responsible to our contemporary moment. Tonight, we have all of our writers, all of our activist scholar partners, Dramaturg, and I all here in one Zoom for the first time to talk about the process of making these plays over the past 6 or so months. Welcome. We're so happy to have everyone here. Before we jump in with our discussion, I would love for everyone to introduce themselves. So if we could do names, pronouns, your role on this project, and just what you do in the world, that would be great. Tatiana, you want to go?
Sure, thank you. Hello, I'm Tatiana. She, her, hers. I'm the dramaturg for this project. And in life, I work in the intersection of dramaturgy and improvisational comedy. Thank you.
My name is Phaedra Michelle Scott, she, hers. I'm a playwright, and in life, I am a playwright, dramaturg, and producer.
Hi, I'm TreaAndrea Russworm, and I am a professor of English, but my specialty is video game studies, so I'm a scholar activist for Phaedra's play.
Hi, I'm Sloth Levine. My pronouns are they, them, theirs. I'm the playwright for Gender Experience Trademark. I'm a playwright, director, and designer.
Hi, I'm Lefevre. I use they, them pronouns, and I am the scholar activist on Sloth's play. And in real life, I also teach at UMass in the theater department and do freelance dramaturgy.
Hi, Jaymes Sanchez, he, him, his. I wrote Beyond Reform. I'm a playwright, I'm an actor, I'm an educator. Happy to be here with all y'all.
Hi, my name's Eli. I use they and he pronouns. I was the activist on James's play, and I am a teacher and youth worker, and I spend a lot of my time working on issues of bail and pretrial incarceration right now.
This is brilliant. I'm like a little unreasonably excited to have all of these voices in the same room together. I'm going to start with a question for our activists. What stood out to you about the play that you were helped to manifest? And follow up to this question, how does the content of the play intersect with your work as an activist? Why don't we start with Finn?
Sure. Some of the things that came up for me were capitalism came up a lot in this play, and capitalism is a huge barrier for trans people accessing healthcare, so that always intersects with my work in trans activism. And early on, we had this conversation about like a fantasy of trans healthcare where it would be like one-stop shopping for trans healthcare. And actually, I'm able to say right now, I'm working with, collaborating with a local organization called Trans Health Northampton, who is just starting this new organization that is doing one-stop shopping for trans health. So that's directly intersecting with my work.
That's absolutely amazing. Can you just pipe on again and say that name of the organization you're working with loudly and slowly for anybody who's watching and who'd like to have that information?
Absolutely. It's called Trans Health Northampton, and you can find it at transhealth.org.
Yes, thank you so much. I'm going to toss the same group of questions over to Eli.
Yeah, for sure. I think I really appreciated how process oriented and sort of like devised this was. And I feel like that resonates with the way that I think about activism and the way that I think about sort of like building abundant abolitionist futures as being rooted in sort of not only like lived experiences and but also sort of like collective world making. And so it was really exciting to see a theater process that so paralleled that sort of activist process. And yeah, that was wonderful.
Awesome, thank you. TreaAndrea.
Yeah, well, since my research is primarily on video games these days, I was more than a little excited to see how Phaedra creatively repurposed the idea of what a video game can and cannot do and what it can be for. And, it's for me, it really addresses the bold question of, can video games be used to critique the present and also imagine better and different futures? And I think in this case of this work, absolutely, we can see that potential there. But it also really kind of updates and I want to say, gives a sort of fresh challenge to the medium, right? Being used in this way and being thought about in this way. And it connects in so many ways to themes like how games are used to explore empathy, whether they're successfully used to do so or not. Other themes like transhumanism and, so being able to sort of explore sustainability and environmental consequences. I think the idea, the inspiration for using games as a kind of launch pad to do all this other work is just amazing. And to me, I said this sort of in my kind of brief remarks over email, it's actually, the play is better than any video game that I've played or studied. So I am really excited to write and think about this work.
Cool. Thank you, everyone. And I want to throw some questions to the playwrights. So when we first got in touch with you for this project back in the day, can you share some of your initial inspirations about what you were interested in writing for? And also how did that start to change once we had conversations with our activists and scholars? And maybe we'll start with Phaedra.
Yeah, so right when Josh messaged me about doing this, I had just finished reading Remembrance of Earth's Past trilogy by Cixin Liu, which is like the first book is called The Three Body Problem, which is incredible. And I also had been watching all of Star Trek from The Next Generation till Enterprise. And so at that point I was in Deep Space Nine. And so I was like in such a sci-fi mood when I was asked to do this. And I was like, absolutely, yes, this is all I'm doing every day. So it was really like kind of kismet that kind of both of those things came in at the same time. I'm also like, I play video games every single day. And so that was also something that I was really interested in exploring too when doing this. And so I kind of felt this was like a love letter to all the things that I like anyway.
Yeah, that's awesome. Sloth?
Yeah, this was like a very interesting, like somewhat departure from like what I have been doing up until this point. Because I write a lot of like genre work, but it's mostly like up until that point it was a lot of horror based stuff with a lot of like gothic influence, which I think like in working on this I realize is in a lot of ways kind of the antithesis of science fiction and visionary fiction. So though I was like thinking a lot about a lot of these same issues, the genres that I was in were much more pessimistic lenses. And so that was really cool to like put on the rose-colored glasses and like see what positive outcomes we could find. that was the most exciting thing for me.
Cool. And Jaymes?
Yeah, so I've always really been interested in political theory, field of study that asks, what is justice? What does a truly just society look like? What is the nature of social contract? And I think that intersects with real life a lot, just because we live in a country with very high rates of incarceration, and with a society that is currently having a lot of conversations about what law enforcement should look like or can look like, or even what it currently looks like. There's disagreements about what that actually is too, which is fascinating. So for me, this play was all about thinking about a criminal justice system and what it could look like going forward. But I think the thing that I was most interested in is just understanding that, well, if we're thinking about a criminal justice system from an angle of political theory and trying to figure out what exactly is the most just way of organizing it, well, the system that we have right now isn't it. It doesn't work. We have, extremely high rates of incarceration per capita and extremely high rates of recidivism. So it's just, even if you have no empathy and don't really care about cruelty and care about people, you got to admit that from that perspective, it doesn't really work. So I was really interested in thinking about, well, what happens to a society going forward with actually trying to change this system, and how does our attachment to punishment and cruelty provide a barrier to any potential change? So that's what I was really interested in, was this tension between an obsession with punishment and obsession with cruelty versus doing literally anything else.
Yeah, this is all really great. And I want to also throw this back to the writers again. And now that when you all came up with these initial ideas and inspirations, can anyone speak to how that changed or evolved, or even significantly differed in the later drafts once we talked to activists? And maybe I'll throw it back to Jaymes, since we've been talking about that a lot recently.
Yeah, my play changed a lot, and for the better. Really, thanks to Eli's help. Eli did a great job of getting me to think beyond kind of the theoretical framework that I was imposing on myself, and to try to get me to place myself more firmly within the reality of the systems and the patterns that the real world is set in. So for me, I kind of latched on to this idea of punishing someone who has committed a crime versus trying to help them reintegrate into society successfully. And because I was so locked into that fun little binary, I kind of got tunnel vision and just didn't really see that the way that I had written the first version of the play was kind of reinforcing some things about the way that a lot of other people see criminal justice system and see people who have committed crimes. And it was saying things that I didn't really want it to say. And Eli helped me figure out how I was doing that and how to get the play closer to what I actually believe is good and true and useful going forward. So really the process for me was just kind of rewriting the play entirely, pretty much, and focusing the play both on this binary between punishment and literally anything else, but also trying to focus on having a conversation about where crime comes from, and what things get to be considered crimes, and trying to figure out, trying to say something about how crime, as we know it, is a construct that comes from unfulfilled needs. So yeah, the process was really important to me, and it changed the play just so dramatically that I'm so thankful for it. So yeah, it was great.
Yeah, thanks, Jaymes. Yeah, we've had when we connected with Eli, it really did set off this whole new wave of creativity for all of us in a really productive way, and in a way that I think helped us be both, thinking forward and really pushing what you're interested in exploring within the text, and gave us a much clearer sense of how can this play exist in a way that is where the intent and the impact are aligned in a productive way for the moment we currently live in. Yeah.
I'd love to answer if
Go
that's
for it.
cool. Yeah. So I've been so interested in like kind of what TreaAndrea was talking about before with like how can gaming be used to teach empathy? And then I was thinking, I was really inspired by the idea of like how can you gamify something horrible? And so then I was like, let me gamify colonization and see what happens when that happens. And I also am really fascinated by online relationships and how they are just as real as like in-person relationships, and how like even if you've never met someone, how you can like tell them everything. And thinking about like, well, what happens when these people who know like the deepest parts of themselves are put into a position where they have to kind of decide whether or not they're going to be friends anymore, essentially. And I think that for me, the process was it was really helpful to have the actors in the room and to be able to write with them. I was really inspired by my conversation with TreaAndrea earlier on in the process, and thinking about how visuals tell a story that sometimes, words can't necessarily explain, and how there's just this unspeakable beauty when it comes to the environment, and how colonization like helps to destroy it. And so I think for me, the process has been so much about like taking inspiration from the people that I've been working with, and then just like playing things, throwing things at the wall. I literally would come in with a different draft every day. My writing process is very much like a ship of Theseus. It's like, all right, I come in with this thing, then all the pieces get torn apart and we get back together, but it's still the ship. However, it's like, maybe not a single word is the same, except for maybe the character names. And so it was really freeing to be in a process where I could just do that and we could just be game to change stuff. And so I really appreciated that built into the process.
Yeah, we love new drafts in new plays. Love that. Sloth, do you want to go and talk about working with Finn?
Yeah. Yeah, it was great working with Finn. They're wonderful. For me, a lot of the process was about like, so we talked about a lot about like what trans people need, which often boils down to healthcare, which is kind of one of the most basic affirmative practices that you can do to, live a trans life in a lot of ways. And like different modes of performance that spoke to the trans experience. So we talked a lot about drag and, how the history of drag really tracked like transgressive gender roles and performances throughout history, and then kind of trying to be like, okay, so where does it go from here? What comes next? And Finn was really great in providing me just like so many artists who are really already starting that work and really combining drag with like, virtual performance and like transhumanism and intense body modification. So kind of that world my brain was living in. And then also just this idea of like what is like perfect trans healthcare, and like once you have it, like what next? Like what do you come up with next? So that kind of built the central question of my play, which is like this team of people who work for this company providing healthcare, trying to think of what comes next. But I also found as I was thinking about it, just like options. There were just options and like splitting paths everywhere, which in a lot of ways is kind of where I think I would like to see gender going. You know, we're breaking down this binary and it opens a spectrum, but then when you go on like a specific path, a life experience, which is like one event after the other, those turn into different tracks. And I think ultimately that's what kind of led to me not writing something linear, and it turned into just kind of these bursts from this world, and kind of exploring different impacts of this technology.
Yeah, we had so many early discussions about like the structure of this kind of play, and thinking about how can the structure of the play mirror the idea of gender in the future that you were interested in. And early on, and I'll say this now, and I know that our streaming video people, you know, would be aghast if we actually asked to do this, because it would be wild. But at one point early on, we said maybe all of the scenes happen in a different order every night. Maybe the audience somehow votes. Maybe something about who is in the audience dictates the structure of the play. And of course, there are like technical reasons why that would be very hard in this medium. But you know, there's something about that fluidity and that maximalism and that desire to show as many experiences as possible, as well as the continued desire for new ones that exists within the play. That feels really. I feel like I see such a clear line from our early discussions about what this world could be to what the like finished version of the play looks like.
Yeah, like the first kind of sketches that I brought in was like going down like a very straightforward path, and I like very quickly I was like, this is like not enough. Like there's not enough within this one storyline to like really kind of think about all of the things that these ideas like inspire in me. Yeah, there was, and I still would love to one day explore the like, I think we had talked about like a gender quiz and allowing people's like results on that quiz to like determine the play order, and just like having them be different genders. I still think that would be really cool.
Yeah. And something that's happened, I think, with all three of these plays in different ways is this desire to like continue to flesh out the worlds, which has been really interesting. You know, we've talked with Jaymes about like maybe this idea becomes a longer play. I know Sloth, we've talked about certain characters in gender experience who could go on and have their own story. I feel like I think about in Unity and with Phaedra's play, how we could have there are these time jumps that, you know, we could fill in. There could be other stories in these worlds, which I think is a testament to the writers and all of your imaginations, and also to our activists and scholar partners by giving us so much to work with, that I feel like we've consistently been like bubbling over with ideas, which is really lovely to be in that place. I know we've heard a lot from the writers about some of these collaborations. I don't know, do we want to have some of our activist scholar partners chime in about those conversations and collaboration?
I was seeing a lot of head nods from Finn. I wanted to offer the opportunity.
I have a lot of feelings. Yes, I'd love to talk. I think one of the things that was really exciting that Sloth touched on was that so much of the time in activism, we're stuck on the things that we don't like, or the things that we want to get rid of, and the things that we want to change, but we spend very little time actually imagining possible different futures. And so this felt like a really useful exercise. And every time we were having a conversation about a new set of characters or a new pathway, it was like imagining a whole new world outside of the structures and constructs we're stuck in right now. So it was really exciting and freeing in that way.
And I think building on that, I think one of the things, like just hearing Sloth talk about their play reminds me of the fact too that people are doing this work in the present of building expansive understandings of gender, of building worlds in which we don't need and we don't want prisons, that they're like, I think what is interesting about this is that simultaneously we're imagining a future, and at the same time we're seeing people in the world actually build that future and live it in their identities, in their communities. And so there's this really exciting sort of symbiotic life imitates art, imitates life kind of relationship that feels like it's actually fairly rare in both activist and theater spaces, and exciting for that reason.
Yeah, TreaAndrea, you were super excited about Unity, and you were like, "Oh, I think that I want to write about this." But what is this project? You're editing a book, and this is what are you doing right now with your life?
Yeah, well, I'm editing a new book called Anti-Racist Futures, and it's a game studies book where it's really on trying to do two things: both kind of analyze the industry, continually hold the industry accountable for its representational problems, its kind of regressive just histories and sort of problematic representations, we would say. So it's doing that, but it's also taking a deeper look at player communities and how people actually end up playing games in usually subversive ways. So, and then it has kind of interviews with designers to talk to them about how they use games to reimagine and create worlds. And the reason I think this play fits in really well with that conversation is because it's visionary fiction is speculative fiction to me. So I think what we're hoping for the games, game studies and the games industry is for it to more intentionally go in a direction like this, for it to more, instead of just kind of using old tropes and old conventions, we're hoping that certain things the mold can be broken in unpredictable ways by using and harnessing some of that energy, creative energy of players, but also of adjacent fields like, creative writers and dramaturgs and poets. And so I see a fusion kind of among all of these different spaces, and games very much, games and play can very much be a part of that. I was very struck visually by the production, and I wonder if everyone sort of thinks of this as theater in this format. Like, what did your orientation to sort of performing a play change with the sort of technological apparatus? I'm sort of a visual culture kind of media studies person, and I wonder if you see the sort of finished project or this version of the project, how do you see it? How would you classify it as a work of art? Which medium are you straddling mediums? That's sort of the question on my mind, because of its visuality, I guess. I mean, so I don't know if folks want to dive in and think a little bit about that. I'm also really curious about the tools that you use, but I can ask you that sort of on the back end. But yeah, how do the writers, think of your work at the end of the day? Is this theater, or is this something else?
So I work a lot in audio plays, and the ones that I find most effective are the ones that I'm like, this can only be in this medium. And so that's what I was thinking about when writing Unity. I was like, well, what can I write that can only be done over Zoom, and that can only be enhanced by being in this like format where we've got one person in space, another person on Earth, and another person on Mars. And so I was just thinking about like all the advantages that you have by that limitation, as opposed to like, oh no, trying to fit theater like into like a separate box, like into something else.
Yeah, this is a great question, TreaAndrea, and this is I think a like field-wide question at the moment as more and more digital theater hybrid things start happening. Thinking about like what is theater, what is film, what is maybe something we don't quite have a word for yet. I feel like I think about this as digital theater, in that it is live. Everything that happens, with the exception of the lip syncs and gender experience, because that is technically possible, but like a a big lift to do live. So pretty much everything being live, I think that makes it feel theater to me. And I think there's something that, like, the difference between like a theater piece and like something that's live on TV for me is the like collective experience of it. So even though we're on YouTube, that there's like the YouTube comment section is going steady all the way through, that there's like encouragement of a shared experience that I think you don't quite get in the same way that you do when watching something live on TV. I think about, there's the playwright performance artist Taylor Mack talks about the ability and desire to incorporate a sense of calamity into theater. And I think one of the things that makes this feel theater to me and not film is the potential for something to go wrong, or potential for something to happen differently than we planned, and the way that we as a live ensemble navigate those surprises feels really unique to a theater experience, as opposed to something that is live on TV. You still expect like a generally like polished outcome. So for me, those are the two things that feel really theater about it, is that it is live and a collective experience with the potential for everything to be brilliant or come falling apart. Yeah, do other folks have thoughts about that? That is the question nowadays. It's a good one.
Something that's coming to mind for me that was definitely unforeseen in writing it, but was like a really fascinating take, was because of that, like the like potential for calamity, the like interruptions that can happen in a digital space are completely different from like the things that can go wrong in a physical theater. And just those kinds of like miscommunications, at least for me watching like gender experience, it really, I think, added to this like sometimes inability to communicate your own gender experience to someone else. And that would not have happened in an in-person production, which really for me made it a very unique medium in that intersecting space. Yeah, it was very cool to see.
Yeah, I don't think I have anything particularly interesting to add to your question, just to agree with Josh that I think that the pressure of liveness, I think, makes it theater, but a different flavor of theater than what we're used to. It's also kind of hard to really put words to it, just because I think we're still very much in this COVID mode of making things work, and that maybe we collectively, as, I don't know, artists or an industry, will have better words to apply to it farther down the road when we have more perspective over it. I will say that for the first draft, at least, I set a couple of rules for myself that I broke with the second draft that I'd like to take another pass and try to reimpose those rules. But for the first draft, two rules that I had for myself was that, we're trying to do this in a way where it makes sense that it's being written for a digital format. Well, I want to write these scenes in a way where characters can't touch each other. That's number one. And characters can't touch objects in the other character's space. And I think that those two rules kind of informed the way that I wrote the play, and made me think of different ways that characters could work on the other character in their scene in order to work towards their objective. And really, a conventional play can be written like that, but if you really wanted to. But I think having those rules set that you can't do that provides certain challenges, but also certain opportunities to do maybe unexpected things with the play. So yeah, I'd kind of like to take another pass and see if I can more strictly reimpose those rules on the current draft. But that's more or less what I did to try to make it fit and make it be specifically written for this medium.
Yeah, that's great. And I think something that has been interesting as we figure out what it is that we're all making, it, the it's different now than it was 6 months ago or 9 months ago. Um, as we have been in this moment in the world, this the capabilities of this work have really like exponentially grown. And I wanted to give a like shout out to Leanna Keys and Kyra Bowie, our streaming team, who are really like at the forefront, I think, nationally of what's possible this way. And I think when we started commissioning these plays, I did not think I did not think this level of design would be possible. And as time went on, and we had Leanna and Kyra in rehearsal, and they started to incorporate things, we would every day would be another moment of like beautiful surprise to realize that, oh, that thing that someone wrote is actually possible this way and is able to look gorgeous. Yeah, so I feel like the question of like what it is we're doing has changed so much even from the start of this to now because of what now can happen design wise.
I think another question of like in addition that we are asking in addition to what is theater now? How does it exist now? Is this theater? Is why theater? Is this something that we should be doing now? And something that I think that we address, that we very, very much tried to address, is by bringing in activists and rooting the work in dreaming about these futures, about these visionary futures, rooting the work in things that are actually happening today.
Yeah, and Tatiana, you bring up like what matters now. What is the best way to use our time in this moment? And I think something that was really important to all of us as we were planning this and working on it is in a project that is imagining better, more just futures, also thinking about how can we envision a better, more humane creative process with the understanding that we're in a pandemic. Things are really hard, Sometimes that means we need to change deadlines for folks when they need some flexibility. Sometimes that means shortening rehearsal hours so that actors don't burn out, right? Thinking about how we can kind of center care for the people while we make this felt like a way to reflect the values of the scripts and the project within how we interacted with each other day to day.
That's awesome.
And I think in terms of, why theater is, I think, a really interesting question. And it's been, for me, interesting to engage with it as someone who doesn't really have a background in theater, but I see in this process and in other theater sort of undertakings that I've been part of, this potential to illustrate like humanity that feels really difficult in some other art forms. And especially in writing, which is like a lot of I think a lot of activists are like writing all the time. And it's like wonderful to be writing, but I think there is something about physicality, even physicality that is like technologically mediated, that gets at some of these like really key issues, partially because some of those issues are themselves about physicality. And so using a medium where we're talking, and I think about this a lot in terms of like my anti-carceral work, right? Where like a lot of what we're talking about is like bodies and what we choose as a society to do or not do with like certain kinds of bodies. And I think that there's some real parallel to some of the stuff around video games and how we understand like what a technologically mediated body is, or some of the work around gender and how we think about like, policing different kinds of bodies. And so there's something to me really appealing about a medium focused on bodies and on physicality.
Yeah, and I think that in this way, and in also like very clever script ways, and this wasn't like necessarily due to talking between the playwrights, all of these plays, I think, very much exist in the same universe. I could very much see each of these plays being within the same sort of extended, larger universe. because of these embodied ideas I think that we're seeing.
Yeah, absolutely. It was wild watching scripts come in and find those connections of things that even though we weren't all talking as a full group as these plays were getting written, the things that feel that feel clear in all of them. So I think this through line of capitalism is really interesting, and like how does capitalism intersect and get in the way of futures we would like to see. There's a lot about like physically taking up space and who society lets take up space, who is given much less space, and how does that affect their mindset about things. That comes up a lot. And yeah, and there's really beautiful language about like bodies and space in all of the plays.
I'm also like super struck by like when you live in a world where you can kind of get anything you want, that's kind of horrible too. That's like its own kind of horror, because then it's like, what do I do? What am I doing? Because it's like, what do you do when you have nothing else to strive for? I don't know.
I very much like ran into that conundrum, Phaedra, where I was like, well, if you get like that, I don't know, like that brass ring, like what's the next thing that keeps you going? And like, which in my play starts with like them trying to find a product, but then kind of turns into this like above gender, like identity that involves like sensory manipulation or whatever. But yeah, it's that kind of like what's next? Where do we go? And I also think that like when we're thinking about visionary futures and like things that we want, I think what we all kind of reduce ourselves to if we take away like society is we're people with bodies and we want those bodies to have a good time. And so I feel like that's just kind of what's at the core of what we're all looking for, you know? And so I think those things naturally came through in all of our scripts.
I'm going to ask a question that we asked of everybody who joined this process, like very initially last year, back in 2020. What are some of your sci-fi touchstones? We'll go very quickly. Mine's definitely Star Trek. I'm going to pass it to Eli.
I think mine is the Allied Media Project folks in Detroit and like the way that they're imagining in particular sort of like Afrocentric futures.
How about Sloth?
For me, like when I think of sci-fi, I immediately go to Star Wars. But I think in writing this and over the past couple of months of like trying to fill my quarantine time, I realized like Pokemon was a huge like basis for me. And just like the idea of like exploring the world and like putting together your customized like team of, I don't know, like values and people and the things you love and like using those to get through this fantastical place. That's kind of, I think that was the most foundational sci-fi for me.
Oh, definitely. Got to catch them all. I'm going to pass it to Josh.
Oh my God. Definitely Star Wars as a kid. I would say Battlestar Galactica and Fringe for TV shows in terms of writers, especially if we're thinking about like speculative fiction, Octavia Butler, N.K. Jemisin, Becky Chambers. There are more people behind me in my bookcase that I'm blanking on.
You'll feel remiss if you don't mention Animorphs.
Animorphs, yes. As a child, Animorphs was a big one. Yes. Important book series right there. A threat to TreaAndrea?
Well, I would also second Octavia Butler and the Parable series, especially in Kindred. Ten and a Riv Do has the Living Blood series, which I really liked. And then in video games, Mass Effect all the way.
How about Phaedra?
Star Trek, of course, Deep Space Nine specifically, Stargate SG-1, if anybody's seen that. Animorphs, N.K. Jemisin, Octavia Butler, like literally, just, I love sci-fi so much. So everything.
Jaymes?
So the X-Men have been really important to me since I was a kid. The comic books, the movies are occasionally fine, but I'm really more about the comic books and the cartoon from the 90s. Frankenstein by Mary Shelley, the original sci-fi novel, I think is great. It's one of my favorites. Jurassic Park has always been a very important movie to me, and like Josh, also Battlestar Galactica.
Finn.
I also love so many of these things. I grew up on X-Men. I grew up on The Next Generation. Love those. Octavia Butler and Nnedi Okorafor in the Binti series is amazing. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is my favorite book series. And Jupiter Ascending and everything from the Wachowski sisters, of course.
God, that's amazing. A friend of mine has been recommending Jupiter Ascending to me. I need to watch it. Amazing. That was lovely. So something that I've been thinking a lot about within this project is, thinking about visionary fiction as opposed to sci-fi in general. So visionary fiction as science fiction that is investigating and interrogating systems of oppression and helping us imagine more just worlds, as opposed to some sci-fi that may purposely or not reinscribe some oppressive power dynamics. And I wanted to open up to truly anyone, like how did that distinction inform the way that you brought yourself and your expertise in your role to this process? And how do you see that kind of visionary fiction idea intersecting with the work you do, either in this process or in your work out in the world?
I would love to jump in on that one. I feel like visionary futures really relates to me to what I do with Theater of the Oppressed, which is a set of techniques by Auguste Boal. And what Boal says is that theater is rehearsal for the revolution. And you practice in a rehearsal space things that you want to enact in the real world. And visionary futures really feels like that. It feels like imagining and creating and embodying a world that we don't have right now, but we want to create, so that we can then do it in the world outside of the rehearsal space. So it feels very much connected to Theater of the Oppressed.
If I can jump in there, like, absolutely, Finn. Well, like I talked about this a little bit earlier, but because I was coming from having worked on like several like more Gothic inspired tropes, I think in writing this, I realized that a lot of those kind of genre things were about exploring some kind of pain. And this really challenged me to imagine a world where like all that pain was gone and see what happened next in some ways. And so that was really cool because I was really like challenged to push beyond. And it just kind of threw everything in the air as far as like my writing process went. And
All right. We are back. We had a connection issue and we are back. We are live. That's what happens sometimes. We were talking, I know Sloth, you were talking about your intersections with this work as opposed to more Gothic tropes. Do you want to go back to that?
Yeah, I don't know where I was cut off, so I'll just try to sum it up. But just, yeah, this idea of using writing to like explore an emotional toll in a lot of ways is kind of where I was coming from in the last couple projects. And this one really was about imagining like the healing process being done in several ways, which was just like both very difficult and also joyous. And I really appreciated that for what it did to my process.
I see writing as like a guidebook. Like, okay, cool. These characters can make all the mistakes, and then I can figure out what I'm going to do in my real life. And I think that for me, I've been so interested in like the concept of like, oh, we're at a barbecue. Like, I think a lot of people are waking up and realizing that they're at a barbecue, and there's a lot of people at this barbecue that are like different from them. And so like, I think I'm just so interested in like, well, what is that moment when someone actually realizes that they're not where they've always been, that like they're actually at a completely different place? And like, how can I use these like fictional scenarios to talk about like that really confusing moment that's just like, oh, but also like that really beautiful moment too. And like, I know it's personal, like personally, it's like, you know, things that are happening to me where I'm realizing like, I don't actually have to be in the systems that are in place. And like how it takes like kind of the system, like how long it takes to actually get to the point where you feel empowered enough to do something different.
Yeah. Go ahead, Eli.
Yeah, I think that that's like very resonant with sort of how I think about this distinction. I think folks who are doing abolitionist work, like we're constantly envisioning a world that at least in the last like 500 or so years in Europe or North America has not existed. And so I think we're thinking in this way where there are not always answers to the issues that are presented, right? Like there's a lot of really thorny stuff around like how you build a world where you actually don't think in punitive carceral ways about people. Like it's one of those things that I think like, especially in the last like year or two, has become like part of like trendy discourse, but it's actually like hard to do. Like to really do it is really difficult. And I think that to me, that feels like resonant with what it's like to really think through visionary futures, right? It's like, it's challenging, it's complex, like there isn't like a one answer. And I think if you're doing it well, there are sort of all these unknowns and you're building from the unknowns, you're sort of leaning into them and you're just being like, yeah, that's weird and hard. Like, let's just jump into it and see where it takes us. And there's something really, really sort of exciting and I think really, like liberatory about that.
Yeah, this is awesome. And something that I've really appreciated about working with everyone on this call as we've worked on these plays is this idea that the process really, really matters, right? I think thinking about visionary fiction as not necessarily utopian, right? Just because we are imagining more just worlds and really looking at the systems we live under doesn't mean that each of these stories and these plays has to be about a world where we've solved all of these problems. It's about investigating the systems that we have and dreaming steps forward. And I think everyone's willingness just to wrestle with those steps and imagine plays and worlds where some things have gotten better, some things are still barriers. Capitalism still exists in all of these plays, right? But that the process and this journey towards something better, each moment along that journey really matters. And having these plays and this process be about moments within a larger context has been really exciting for me as we do this work.
Does anybody have any moments of surprise from this process or moments of discovery? Things you're like, oh, I'm thinking about this content in a completely different way now.
I guess just that, like, I really want to write more of it. And that, like, you know, we're just really leaning into who I am as like a gamer person who like I actually, right around the time I did this, I ended up applying for a job to write an role-playing game with a Swedish game company. And so I'm doing that now where I'm writing about creating intersectional characters for like gamers. And so it's like really, really cool. But honestly, it was something that I definitely would not have done unless I was just like, you know what? I can do this. Like, so I would say, yeah, that was it.
I would love to circle back around to the word utopia, because I think in our culture, we understand well dystopia. Dystopias are all around us. We live in a dystopia, but a lot of the most popular fictional worlds have been dystopian, and it's a production trend in video games. So there's zombie apocalypse, there's all kinds of dystopias, right? But I would encourage us to not shy away from the word utopian or utopia, because utopia doesn't mean paradise. It doesn't mean that all the problems are solved. Utopia, a critical utopia, is a vision of unmet desires being fulfilled. But that process is always messy, right? Utopias are not these boring, perfect places. Utopias are still striving. And even when you imagine utopia, you can still imagine what that work is like to try to create and maintain structures where those desires are met and realized. But it's going to be tenuous work, right? As the sort of visionary futures kind of models or speculative models always show us. So I'm all for recuperating that term utopia and really playing with what that means, playing with these alternate visions of what utopia is, because we get dystopia. We really well understand that. But if we can't imagine and claim utopia, then I think we have our work cut out for us, right? So I always call on our creative minds to continue to play with that. Don't shy away from utopia, even if it is paradise. But quite often it's not that. It's a constant striving toward.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thank you for that. Yeah, I love that. And so I know we are approaching our time limit, and that feels like a really wonderful place to end here. So I just wanted to say a huge thank you to everyone here for your work on this project over these months. It has been so meaningful for me as a whole, and especially getting to have all of you together tonight is really special. So thank you all for being here. We have 2 more shows tomorrow night and Friday night. You can jump on the UMass website to reserve your tickets. They're free, but we'll send you the YouTube link so it's really easy to access. And if you can't make it later this week, keep an eye out, because recordings of the plays will be on demand sometime soon. Thank you all so much. Have a good night. We appreciate you.